I'm Joao, and like a few other people today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Web3. More specifically, though, I want to talk about how Web3 is making the internet your oyster and the doors that it's opening up, the distribution of value that's taking place because of Web3. So first, I want to highlight a little bit on just how far the internet has come and how profoundly it's impacted our world and shaped access to information. And then I want to explain where Web3 is enabling the production and redistribution of value, driving unprecedented access to opportunities. This is also why I've started my most recent company, Mint House, in the Web3 space. We do smart contract development, specifically looking to work with projects that are bringing interesting utility to the table and exploring these new use cases for blockchain technology. How many Einsteins do you think we missed throughout history? Or better yet, where would we be today if we had discovered all of these Einsteins, Newtons, and Mozarts 200 years ago? Einstein is often well known for having taught himself high-level mathematics, physics, and philosophy, and discovering his own proof of the Pythagorean theorem at 13, mastering integral and differential calculus by age 14, and the countless other scientific discoveries in his later years. But he wasn't, however, born with this knowledge. He spent his early years devouring any math textbooks he could get his hands on. Namely, he had a family tutor who'd give him various mathematical textbooks on geometry and so forth, and he was introduced to philosophers such as Immanuel Kant, whose work he continued to read into. Granted, maybe not every 11-year-old does calculus as a hobby, but the point I wanted to illustrate in this example is that Einstein's curiosity ultimately only came to fruition because he had fundamental access to knowledge that was largely inaccessible to the rest of the population on Earth during his time. Knowledge was a privilege reserved for those who were lucky enough to be born in a country and or family with access to such resources. In fact, for a long time, education was also considered a luxury for the elite. For the vast majority of human history, most children, especially those born into poverty, were raised to help out in laborious tasks such as farming. Now, today, in most developed countries, access to the internet has lowered the barriers to knowledge by orders of magnitude. And it's created a paradigm shift in education, self-learning, and most importantly, access to opportunities. Anyone with an internet connection and a web browser can learn about almost anything, quite literally. From calculus, like Einstein, to carbon nanotube chemistry and aerospace engineering and everything in between. There were over 3.4 billion internet users in 2016, and over the last few years, there's been a rough average of 640,000 people going online for the first time every single day. I know the impact of this digital revolution firsthand. I'm standing here today speaking at my second TEDx conference, online, age 17, having built various businesses and countless projects. I started researching, coding, building, writing, founding, interning since I was 12, purely out of my own curiosity to do so, but also because the access to my devices enabled me to do so. You might be wondering at this point, what does this really have to do with Web3? This is probably a good time also for me to set some context about Web3 and explain the crux of these new technologies grouped under the term Web3. So Web3 is anything that directly interacts with a blockchain. By extension, it's also important for me to define what a blockchain is and provide some added context. So blockchains, at a root level, are a public digital ledger, a collection of accounts in which account transactions are recorded. Now, this ledger is hosted on a peer-to-peer network, meaning there is a network of computers all running the same ledger. So when someone attempts to make a fraudulent transaction, it can be spotted because their ledger won't match anybody else's. Another important feature to remember is that no transactions can be undone. Any transaction is permanent. This also means that you can trace anything on the blockchain back to where it originated. Now, some may be more familiar with this concept, while for others it may be a little harder to immediately grasp. But I only need you to remember three key things here. Firstly, blockchain is a digital public ledger. Anyone can see what's going on. Secondly, this ledger is immutable. Nothing can be undone. And thirdly, this ledger is incorruptible. This ledger is almost impossible to hack. There are some attacks, but they're very, very hard to carry out, especially on bigger blockchains. Now, I'm not here to delve into technical details on how this technology ensures all of this, but I'll gladly entertain any questions about blockchain if you have them afterward. If you're not presently familiar with where blockchain is being applied today, it's also worth knowing about a particular blockchain called Ethereum. Now, this blockchain, Ethereum, was created as a successor to the very famous Bitcoin and supports not only the transaction of cryptocurrencies, which is one of the more known applications of blockchains, but also smart contracts, which are contracts written in code. Now, like regular contracts, these are agreements between parties, with consequences, which in the case of smart contracts are enforceable by code. This is a really powerful technology because there's no reliance on third parties for mediation should any contract terms be violated. Instead, the code simply executes. So there are new organizations being built using these technologies, as well as extraordinarily useful tools, particularly financial services. Cryptocurrency-based financial services on the blockchain have actually been coined as DeFi, short for decentralized finance, which Dr. Haas talked a little bit about earlier. Having established a little more context on blockchain, I can now also start to unravel just how exactly Web3 is radically redistributing value. So while I was able to learn almost anything that I was curious about online, I couldn't really deploy my knowledge. And specifically, I couldn't reap value out of any projects of mine solely on the internet as a creator. Now, this is where Web3 comes in. Web3 has been driving a radical shift in value distribution on the internet and is ever increasingly enabling more individuals around the world to create value for themselves. It's shifting the livelihood of thousands and creating newfound access to opportunities for value generation, going even further than what the internet has already done. Unfortunately, though, Web3 has been plagued with a little bit of a scammy reputation to many. The space has grown, I think, to be somewhat polarized between either highly pro Web3 people with hardcore supporters going on about how holding investments will go to the moon. And then on the other hand, you have people highly skeptical of Web3, doubting its value add and any legitimate use case of NFTs and highlighting excessive hype. Ultimately, things aren't black and white, and both sides do bring valid points. But if you can cut through the clutter, however, you can start to see where Web3 might objectively actually really bring something new to the table. These are the areas that I really want to highlight. The core of Web3 is driven on decentralization of power, and by extension, also value. So the internet today, until today, Web2 as it's been coined, and as explained by Dr. Haas and a couple other speakers, has been based on sharing content through a few major platforms, which control information flow and value. Web3, on the other hand, is driven by decentralized systems. No one entity controls the blockchain itself, and transactions are direct between the involved parties or managed by smart contracts. There's no major platform taking a big cut. Now, one manifestation of this in the Web3 space has come to be the DAO. It's an acronym that stands for a decentralized autonomous organization. It has no executive leadership and is an entirely self-governing body. So often these DAOs may have their own tokens and or other means of funding their organization, and these members choose where to apply this money. So these DAOs will often be created with particular mission statements, and then they will fund their initiatives and projects in accordance with that mission. So Ukraine DAO, for example, raised 5.5 million for charity by auctioning an NFT of the Ukrainian flag. Or Uniswap DAO, which has created a multi-billion-dollar DeFi platform. Another thing Web3 is doing is driving a creator-first economy that allocates market value as per supply and demand to creators and artists. This has been particularly seen in the case of NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens. Now, it's key to note here, NFTs are not just digital art. This is often a really limiting view of that people presume when they first encounter NFTs. But NFTs are actually a digital certificate of authenticity that is stored on the blockchain, and they prove that you own something digitally. Now, in the case of artists, they prove that you own a particular piece of art by a particular creator. So this enables users to invest in their favorite creators and own a piece of their work, even online. And the money obviously goes to help fund said artists. Previously, there was no concept of online ownership. There were attempts at doing this by using stuff like copyright and watermarks, but none of these were particularly effective. Now, in the world of DeFi, there are countless innovations on financial protocols to provide services typically provided through traditional financial institutions. Especially in developing countries, these have been exceptionally successful in providing individuals and small businesses with access to financial services that they didn't previously have. And this has immense potential to help raise the economic standards of said countries. So Aave, for example, it's an open source DeFi protocol that enables people to earn interest deposits and earn interest on borrowing assets. Web3 also has a number of use cases yet to be explored that could create significant value add in industries across the map. So for example, you could write an escrow smart contract to restructure payment systems. You remove the need for an escrow company and you pay a significantly cheaper amount. As well as this, the transparency of the blockchain enables auditing costs to be far easier with the right resources. Now, NFTs could potentially be used for, say, government identification because they can't be replicated and they're easily verifiable. They're certificates of authenticity. NFTs also could have huge potential in supply chain tracking, which is notoriously inefficient with difficult logistics. In a 2017 Business Continuity Institute report on global supply chains, 69% of respondents reported they don't have full visibility of their supply chains. NFTs could change that by orders of magnitude. Now, drawing this to a close, the only thing I really wanted to shed some light on was why blockchain is so transformative, beyond the noise and big numbers that are thrown around in the media. If you've been largely skeptical about Web3, it's understandable, but it's also worth giving it a chance sometimes to the projects that are driving legitimate value and actually exploring new use cases. So Filipinos, for example, have been reaping the benefits. They found an innovative way to derive some value from the ecosystem during the pandemic last year through play-to-earn video games on a platform called Axie Infinity, where users can earn crypto and valuable NFTs by winning and getting better at the game. Ultimately, I just want you to take 3 key things away from my talk. Firstly, Web3 is removing third parties that are taking big cuts in value transactions, whether that value be in the form of money, data, or other forms. Secondly, Web3 is redistributing value to creators and users on the internet. And thirdly, Web3 is driving exponential access to opportunities for value generation. That value generation is key because it didn't exist in Web 2. Now, the internet is allowing our hidden Einsteins to learn, and Web3 is empowering them to gain value from their work, to earn and grow and build accessible platforms. Web3 is enabling us to discover our hidden Einsteins and not leave them forgotten in history. For the first time in mankind's story, all of this value is at your fingertips through the internet. And that is something that is profoundly transformative. Web3 is making the internet your oyster.